Hey everyone, Charlie here. I hope you're all doing well. Moving away from your home, right, whether it's a new city or it's a new country, a new state, whatever, can be an isolating experience, right? It can make you feel lonely, it can make you feel as though you don't have any friends or any kind of support system. But what I want to talk to you about today is if you're planning on coming to Japan, what the most important thing is for you to focus on if you want to make sure this doesn't happen to you. Right, now I got this idea to talk about this from another vlogger by the name of Higgins in Japan, who recently made a really good video called Isolating Yourself in Japan. His main idea is, well, I'll let him tell you himself.
Now, if you live someplace like Inaka, like out in the countryside, kind of like where I live, I feel like that's an easier emotion or problem to deal with of just being isolated. Because a lot of times out here in the country, there's not a lot going on. There's not a lot going on. There's not a lot to do sometimes, and it can get very easy for me, especially. I mean, I'll just use myself as an example because I wouldn't want to like point fingers at anybody. But for me, I find it very easy sometimes to just kind of be antisocial.
Now, what I really liked about Higgins' video is that most of the time, I think when other foreigners talk about isolating yourself in Japan, we tend to focus on the external things, right? Like, you see so many videos, you see so many blog posts about how maybe Japanese people are the ones that are excluding you. They don't want to let you into the group. They don't want to invite you into certain activities and things like that. And while that certainly does happen, I don't want to say it never happens, because it does. And this is something I've talked about before in a One Cuppa episode. The fact of the matter is, I think the biggest problem usually lies in the way that we sort of act, the way that we isolate ourselves here in Japan, right? Now, one of the things that I really liked also that Higgins focused on in his video is this idea that it's kind of a fight sometimes to actually want to break out of your shell, to break out of your bubble or whatever, to get out there and meet people or to see things in your local area or to get on a train and travel a little bit. And this is something I understand, right? Now, this depends entirely on your personality, and I can only talk about my own, but, whoa. There's a dog. Ohayou gozaimasu. As for myself, I am an introvert, right? Despite what most people think, I am an introvert. I like hanging out with people, and I value my human relationships a lot, right? Like, that's the thing that always holds me back from doing most things, is not being able to be around people that I really care about. And that's one of the things that held me back from coming to Japan for so long, was sort of like being too afraid of losing people. But I also get burnt out very easily, and so what happens is I go through these cycles where I sort of am really engaged with people, and then I need time to recharge. Now, the thing is, when you're just starting out here, I think I understand how emotionally difficult it can be as like an introverted person to get out there and want to explore and meet people and everything like that. But I think it's really essential to let people know that you're alive and that you exist in your area, so that they can get used to you, and once they're used to you, start talking to you, and you can start making friends right now. And again, I understand how difficult that is, because I'm the type of person who 9 times out of 10, if it's a choice between like, hey, let's go get stupid drunk on a Friday night, or let's like sit at home and watch a movie, or do something equally relaxing, I'm more likely to pick the latter. But it's something that I've gotten better about since I've been here. I'm a lot more social here than I was before, but it seems that people kind of understand your need to be alone a bit more here than my friends did back home, which is nothing against them, I want to point out. Now, another thing that Higgins pointed out, and I think this is something that's really important to talk about, is that your language ability is going to be a really limiting factor, right? And this is something I've said before, but too many of us do not take responsibility for our own motivation, or our lack of motivation, or being able to motivate ourselves to learn Japanese. And like Higgins and like some other of my friends in this community, I sort of live in sort of like the countryside, so particularly if I don't speak at least passable Japanese, or at least conversational level Japanese. I'm not going to say my Japanese is great, because it's not. I would be so miserable. And I think that's probably why for the first 6 months that I was here, it was like, okay, well, what do I do? Who do I talk to? Who do I become friends with? And it's not to say people don't try and talk to you if you don't speak Japanese, right? For the most part, people are really interested. They want to know why you came here. There are a lot of people who want to be your friend, right, in the countryside, I found. Eventually I found. But, and this is something I talked about more recently, you do hit this wall where, okay, if we're going to be friends, if we're going to be real friends, you need to be able to speak more than just basic Japanese, right? That's just the fact of the matter. But I think what ends up happening, and this is sort of like the main point of this video, is that there becomes like this vicious cycle, right? Of where you realize that you really need to get better at Japanese, but you also realize that in some ways, most ways, in the important ways, you need to get out more to be able to learn Japanese, right? So in my particular example, what has happened to me sort of recently is that I realized that there's only so much conversation can do for you if you don't know a word, if you don't know a grammar form, if you don't know whatever, right? So there has to be a lot of book study, right? There has to be a lot of that sort of input-based study where you're reading a lot, where you're learning new vocabulary, and also where you're practicing the writing part of it, right? And I think to some extent that really has to come first. That really has to come first. Before you can really go out and sort of not make a complete fool out of yourself. I think it's really easy to focus too much on that initial study period. Usually, for example, now during the week I study about 3 hours before work. Sometimes I study for that hour during my lunch break. But so pretty much all of my free time is studying Japanese, and then I go to work, and then I come home, right? And it's really easy to sort of stay in that cycle, particularly because you do see benefits coming from that, at least when you're trying to read something or you're watching something with subtitles on Netflix, whatever the case may be. But then when you find yourself trying to go out and talk to people, something doesn't quite translate, right? And in some ways it's about, well, of course it's listening practice, but it's also you're not getting enough output. And so all of this to say that isolating yourself here is easy. And I think the biggest trap that we fall into in the sort of foreign community here is not being serious enough about our Japanese studies, which then leads to people excluding us because maybe not even purposefully, but maybe we don't get invited to things. Maybe people realize that they can't have the friendships with us that they very much probably want to have a lot of the times. And so it's not other people's fault. A lot of the time it's our fault. It's our fault, I think. And so, anyway, like Higgins said, I don't want to tell you how to sort of come over here and live your life, but this is something I've said time and time again on this channel, is that if you really want to enjoy your time here, if you want to have an enriching, deep, fulfilling, meaningful experience and make meaningful relationships that will sort of last while you're here and hopefully beyond that, you need to put in the effort. You need to put in the effort. You need to have that fight with yourself to push yourself harder so that you don't end up putting yourself in this bubble, which may lead you into like the Gaijin bubble or just being completely alone bubble for your entire stay here. And I can tell you from that time that I had here living in that bubble, it was not a fun time. It was miserable. It was lonely. I was very depressed. And since choosing, and that's ultimately what it is, and every day sort of choosing and having the fight with myself to be like, Jesus, do I really want to study more right now? And having to say yes to myself, that has led to really incredible things, and having interesting friendships and interesting romantic relationships and things like that. So without belaboring the point, I want to thank Higgins in Japan for making his video and sort of inspiring me to elaborate on one of the points that he brought up. Please check out his channel. I've never met him, except I did kind of meet him in that he was on the same flight home to America as me last Christmas. I saw him and kind of recognized him and was like, somehow I know this guy. But anyway, we didn't meet at that point. But his videos, he seems like a very genuine person. He seems like a very sort of soft-spoken but honest person. And yeah, he makes some really interesting videos about his life here in Japan, which his experience differs in some ways from mine, of course. And that's always interesting to watch, right? So like I said, please check out his channel. Thanks again to Higgins for letting me use some of his footage in this video and for inspiring this video. And yeah, I'll see you guys very soon indeed. Cheers.